Welcome to Mosaic Wellness University. This is your wellness coach, Dr. David Harper, and this is class number 7, Diseases of Lifestyle, the Secret Killer. So what is a disease of lifestyle? Lifestyle diseases are diseases that appear to become even more widespread as the countries of the world become more industrialized. Lifestyle diseases are different from other diseases because these are preventable. They can be stopped or reversed if if changes are made in diet, lifestyle, and the environment. Listed here are several of the diseases of lifestyle. They include Alzheimer's disease, atherosclerosis or heart disease, asthma, cancer, chronic liver disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, heart disease, Crohn's disease, nephritis or chronic renal failure, osteoporosis, stroke, depression, and obesity. In many Western countries, people's diets changed substantially in the second half of the 20th century, generally with increases in the consumption of meat, dairy products, vegetable oils, fruit juice, and alcoholic beverages, and decreases in the consumption of starchy staple foods such as bread, potatoes, rice, and maize flour. Other aspects of lifestyle also changed, notably large reductions in physical activity and large increases in the prevalence of obesity. It was also noted in a study, The Effect of Diet on the Risk of Cancer in the Lancet, that in the 1970s that people in many Western countries had diets high in animal products, fat, sugar, and had high rates of cancer of the colorectal area, breast, prostate, endometrium, and lung. Where by contrast, individuals in developing countries usually had diets that were based on one or two starchy staple foods with low intake of animal products, and therefore had lower rates of cancers. So guys, it's important to understand that lifestyle diseases are reversible. Lifestyle diseases are not reversible, though, by drugs. They're only managed by drugs. Lifestyle diseases are only reversible by making specific positive changes in your lifestyle before permanent damage is done to your body. If your heart is permanently damaged due to disease, if cancer has ravaged your body, or if a diabetic never does anything but keeps pumping themselves full of insulin, then eventually the damage is not reversible. So when is the best time to make any lifestyle change? When is that? Yesterday. There's nothing I can do about it. I got this from my grandparents, my parents, a bad virus, bad luck, a bad roll of the dice. We hear this all the time. Another one, too bad you've got your parents and your grandparents' genes. You didn't get the gene pool jackpot. Guys, we've been brainwashed over the past 50 years that heart disease, cancer, and diabetes are not only not our fault, but that we can blame it on our parents and our grandparents. Modern research has found that changing your lifestyle changes your genes. Guys, it's a new science called epigenetics. In a pilot study by Dr. Dean Ornish, the nutritionist, involving men with prostate cancer, it was found that more than 500 genes changed the way they worked when the patients did not take the drugs but instead followed a whole grain plant-based diet and exercised. Genes with beneficial results, including some tumor suppression genes, became more active in the male subjects, and genes with deleterious effects, including some cancer-promoting genes, were switched off. Basically, how the subjects exercised and what they ate changed the way their genes expressed themselves. Now here's something else to consider. Do you remember that movie, Super Size Me? Do you remember the star of the show, the gentleman who decided to change his dietary habits by taking McDonald's 3 times a day? And you may say, gosh, that was just his bad luck. No, it was the way in which his body responded to the environment. There was a mismatch between the way in which his body was able to handle the environment that he was exposing himself. At this time, it was the McDonald's food. So we have this example here called the loaded gun analogy. So let me put it this way. As one researcher has put it, faulty genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. This idea has some far-reaching implications. For if our lifestyle brings these diseases on, is it possible that an improvement in our lifestyle could also prevent or even reverse these conditions? The Pima Indians of Arizona are the poster children for diabetes, obesity, and diabetes type 2. They have the same genetics as the Pima Indians of northern Mexico. However, because of adopting a standard American diet, which is high in processed foods, refined wheat and sugar, and a lifestyle that averages only 7 hours a week of physical activity, 80% of all the women are not only obese, they are also diabetic. Their counterparts in Mexico, who still eat a plant-based diet, whole grain diet, are rarely diabetic and weigh an average of 57 pounds less. Same genes, different lifestyle, different health pictures. Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Degenerative diseases, guys, according to the Schwarzbein principle, are not genetic but acquired. So poor eating and lifestyle habits, not genetics, are the major causes of degenerative diseases. Poor lifestyle habits. So what are they? In 1900, the top 3 causes in the United States and North America were pneumonia or influenza, tuberculosis, and diarrhea. These were infectious and communicable diseases that accounted for about 60% of all deaths. By 2010, the 3 biggest killers were heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. The leading cause of death in North America is not heart disease, cancer, stroke, or diabetes. It is an unhealthy lifestyle that most Canadians are addicted to, which is the true cause. A study by Matthew Reeves, a Michigan State University epidemiologist, finds that only 3% of North Americans maintain a healthy lifestyle. Quote, "It is a situation that's causing dire consequences for millions of North Americans. I was really quite surprised at how low that number was," end quote, said Reeves. The research published in the Journal of Archives of Internal Medicine found that only 3% undertook 4 basic steps that define a healthy lifestyle. Number 1, not smoking. Number 2, healthy weight. Number 3, eating right, including a minimum of 5 fruits and vegetables a day. Number 4, exercising at least 5 times a week for 30 minutes. You can be a 3%er. All you need to do is be on that hat of put on that hat of responsibility and make the choice. So what is the silent killer? In February 2004, Time magazine hailed the research that changed how we think about lifestyle diseases and pinpointed the secret killer. I've talked about this in the clinic. So what is it? What is causing more diseases than any virus or bacteria in the world? Why is there so much heart disease, diabetes, cancer, strokes, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, etc.? Why is it? The secret killer was discovered through several different ways. So let's find out what they were. In order to do that, we have to go all the way back to 1961 and the huge Framingham heart study. What they discovered while studying heart disease, that in many of the heart vessels they found clots and plaques. Researchers went to work identifying the contents of this clotting and plaquing and found something in common. All the plaques contain a molecule known as cholesterol. It was theorized that cholesterol in high amounts in the bloodstream somehow stuck to the arterial walls, gradually clogging the blood vessels, causing an eventual closing off of an artery. Or that the plaque would rupture, break off, and form a clot that blocked the artery downstream. In other words, heart disease and heart attacks were basically seen as a plumbing problem. In order to fight the buildup of this plaque, the low-fat diets, the rotor-rooter surgeries, and the stents were developed. Later came the drugs designed to block the body's ability to make cholesterol, thus lowering the blood cholesterol levels, which we call statins. How did they do? Heart disease multiplied exponentially from 1961 until now. Nothing changed. Low-fat diets did not lower heart disease. In fact, the switch to vegetable oils actually fueled the problem and made it worse. Stents prolong life but do nothing to prevent another heart attack. Statins were successful at lowering blood cholesterol levels but do not lower the risk of heart attack or stroke. Today, over half of all heart attacks occur in people with normal blood cholesterol levels. Cholesterol was not and never has been the problem. In 1997, research at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston developed a blood test called C-reactive protein, or CRP, which they claimed roughly measured the level of inflammation in the body. They theorized that cholesterol was not the problem, that the problem was chronic inflammation of the arteries, which the body was repairing and patching up by laying down a layer of protection that we call plaque, the chief consistent being cholesterol. In other words, cholesterol was being made by the body to repair the damage to the blood vessel walls. They theorized that if this were true, that their new blood test, the CRP test, would be a better indicator of heart disease than serum cholesterol levels. Well, they were right. Men with high CRP had 3 times the number of heart attacks over a 6-year period than those with the lowest CRP. They were overwhelmingly correct. CRP could predict who was going to have a heart attack, where cholesterol levels really indicated nothing that was helpful. The bottom line was this. As the research continued, it was found that the chronic inflammation not only preceded heart disease, but was also the primary risk factor for a number of diseases including Alzheimer's, arthritis, asthma, cancer, chronic liver disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, Crohn's disease, osteoporosis. Basically all of the diseases from the second slide of this presentation that were considered as lifestyle diseases were all found to have chronic inflammation at its root and at its core. The secret killer, guys, is chronic inflammation and has now been shown to be a major factor in tissues throughout the body. Wherever the inflammation occurs, the manifestation of inflammation is different. If it's in the blood vessels, heart disease and stroke. Joints, osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. Skin, eczema, psoriasis. Nervous system, MS, Alzheimer's disease. Pancreas, chronic pancreatitis, diabetes type 2. In the immune system, chronic fatigue syndrome. Lungs, bronchial tubes, asthma. Intestines, Crohn's disease. Muscle, fibromyalgia. Bones, osteoporosis. Every single area of the body we have given it a label, a diagnosis, but at the core, the manifestation as it targets that area, that tissue, chronic inflammation. So it begs the question, is inflammation good or bad? Just as the plants in your garden need a good mixture of sun and rain to thrive, we all need a measure of inflammation to survive. Acute inflammation is the short-term immune response of our bodies that our bodies mount in cases of trauma, infection, and allergy. Whether you've broken a bone, burned yourself on a hot stove, or been exposed to a foreign microorganism, the body is programmed to carry out a similar response. In this response, it will identify the infectious or dangerous substance, determine which cells are self cells, and which are non-threatening, and which are non-self cells, which are threatening, assess the level of threat, mount a response, and repair any resulting damage. In a perfect world, the response occurs just as it should, releasing pro-inflammatory compounds, hormones made in every cell of the body called eicosanoids when needed, and then turning them off when the anti-inflammatory components when the threat has been sufficiently addressed. So again, here we see on the red side, there's cell damage from the injury, damaged cells and signals, there's pro-inflammatory chemicals called eicosanoids that are released, the inflammation begins, there's vasodilation to allow the body to send the proper cells to the area, white blood cells attracted to the injured area down across the bottom on the right, and as it moves through, the healing process begins, cell signals begin to get stimulated, they're anti-inflammatory, these levels drop, and then healing and repair is completed. In chronic inflammation, we have a different story. In chronic inflammation, what happens is there's a response that does not completely get turned off or extinguished. It acts like a slow-burning fire. It continues to stimulate pro-inflammatory immune cells when they may not be needed. What happens when these excess immune cells are circling our systems? They can damage healthy areas of our body. In other words, there's friendly fire damage. So, what do we have here? We have cell damage that continues. It follows around the right side. The damaged cells continue to produce the pro-inflammatory eicosanoids. The white blood cells are released. The healing process and repairs begins to occur, but there's a problem with it. There's an attempt to clean it up, but the cells cannot produce enough healing and repair. It's never completed, and so what happens is this cycle just continues to circle around and to circle around. Chronic inflammation is a smoldering fire inside you that causes your body to turn on itself. Andrew Weil, the famous medical doctor that has written many, many different books about health and healing, suggests that chronic inflammation may be the root of all degenerative diseases. And if you've heard me talk in the clinic, I've talked about the fact that why does somebody bend over, pick up a piece of paper, and have such a dramatically exaggerated response with pain and inflammation to such a simple activity? Guys, this is part of the reason why. There can be pro-inflammatory roots or centers within your body that contribute to what we might want to call a total body burden or a total chronic inflammation body burden, such that when something small happens, it causes this dramatic, excessive, over-exaggerated response because it already has a lot of inflammation going on. This could happen with a respiratory problem. It could happen with a digestive problem because a lot of the various different sources and roots of inflammation are coming from areas that we can't see. We can't see what's going on in our digestive tract, where a lot of inflammation can begin to occur because of the foods that we eat that are not helpful for our body personally. What ends up happening is we go to seek help from those resources, those medical resources that look at only certain areas of the body but don't necessarily understand how a certain area can be experiencing all of this reaction, but it's coming from all of these different areas. The body can be having inflammation caused from multiple centers that increases this body burden. And so we see here that you can get chronic inflammation from changes in body pH. And we talked about the need for having an alkaline environment. And we talked about the need to consider controlling that part of your body, that water part of your body that can greatly influence pH through the Kangen water systems. We can talk about toxins that can come from inside where food is not properly digested because of maybe an antibiotic course that you might have had when you were younger. Allergies, fat cells that can contribute to chronic inflammation. Stress, which increases cortisol, can increase the potential for chronic inflammation. Sugar, wrong types of fats that we might be consuming, and all of these potential locations, potential inputs can come, and each one of these when looked at may not necessarily look bad as itself, but the contribution of each of these representing 20%, let's say for example each of these representing 20 or 5%, when they accumulate and they stack together, it creates this total body burden of chronic inflammation that leads to lifestyle diseases. So guys, we're going to go over some diagrams for the next few minutes, okay? Please don't get bogged down with the science or the vocabulary. The main thing that I want you to know and to understand is that how you live your life either creates or reduces chronic inflammation, and that chronic inflammation leads to many different diseases. This is the new science which we've only just begun to understand in the last few years. In fact, I'm going to tell you something that may bother some of you in this room. If your doctor is still prescribing statins for high cholesterol and trying to bring down your cholesterol levels, if your doctor is still providing Fosamax, Boniva, or female hormones to prevent osteoporosis, you may want to consider finding another doctor. They are either still practicing in the 90s or they haven't taken the time to learn anything new since they graduated from medical school. All right, we're now going to talk about omega fats and inflammation, okay guys? So let's get started. This is probably the easiest thing for you to change starting right now, and it is one of the biggest problems with chronic inflammation today. Two essential omega fats our body must get from our food are omega-3s and omega-6 fats. Our bodies cannot make them. Historically, when hens, livestock, and dairy cows were raised on their natural foods, they are very high in omega-3 fatty acids. Today, raised on man-made pellets and feed, the omega-3s are nearly non-existent. For most of our history on the planet, the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s was about 2 to 1. But today, with less and less omega-3s available and the high use of vegetable oils like corn oils, which are high in omega-6s, the ratios have now grown to about 20 to 1. In fact, 60% of all North American adults and 78% of North American children are omega-3 deficient, which is the number 6 killer in North America. Why are omega-3s so important? Well, remember those hormone-like chemicals made by every cell in your body called eicosanoids from the previous slides. They play an integral part in starting the inflammatory process and also in shutting it off. The pro-inflammatory eicosanoids that initiate the inflammatory process are made from the omega-6 fatty acids, and the anti-inflammatory eicosanoids that shut down the inflammatory process can only be made from the omega-3 fatty acids. So do you see the importance of omega-3 fats? If we don't have enough in our diet, we will be unable to shut down the inflammation process, and inflammation then becomes chronic. A brand new connection to omega-3s is the production of serotonin. Serotonin is a chemical made in your brain that normalizes brain function and can lead to a sensation of well-being. When there are enough omega-3s to produce sufficient quantities of serotonin, when there's not enough omega-3s to produce sufficient quantities of serotonin, the result is depression. So you can see here on the right side, in that in the middle part of that right arrow that's red, you see the omega-6 fats that help to provide the necessary resources for the pro-inflammatory eicosanoids. And on the left side, the process of reducing inflammation, you need the omega-3s. Okay. So in this diagram, we see that omega-6s are needed to start the inflammatory process. Okay? The inflammatory cascade starts with cell damage. So when a cell is damaged in some way, it releases a flare, signaling the immune system to jump into action. That damage could be being hit by a puck, it could be spraining your ankle, it could be lifting something heavy, it could be turning your neck when you don't have the proper range of motion. Anything that stimulates cell damage from any type of cell will signal this flare. The flare is a pro-inflammatory eicosanoid manufactured from an omega-6 fat. The eicosanoids attract white blood cells to attack the invaders and to break down and repair any damage. If the damage is extensive or ongoing, the white blood cells release pro-inflammatory chemicals called cytokines, which amplify the immune system response and attract more immune cells. If repair is not possible because of the magnitude of the damage or the ongoing assault, then the inflammation process does not shut down and chronic inflammation is the result. Something important to remember is that the byproduct of inflammation produce exudates that are acid and enter the lymphatic and bloodstream. Chronic inflammation can promote a lower pH of the body fluids, which is again why having water that makes up 70 to 75% of our body at a very alkaline level, and the only way to do that is to manipulate it, and the best system in the world is the Kangen system that we have in the clinic. Today we get omega-6s primarily from seeds and nuts and the oils extracted from them. Refined vegetable oils such as safflower, sunflower, corn, and soy oil are used in most of the snack foods, cookies, crackers, and sweets in the North American diet, as well as in fast food. Soybean alone is now so ubiquitous in fast foods and processed foods that an astounding 20% of the calories in the North American diet are estimated to come from this single source. Omega-3 fats primarily come from cold water fish and from flaxseed. It used to be widely available in grass-fed meats, poultry, dairy, and eggs, but with the man-made animal feeds and loss of natural eating habits in favor of modern ranching and dairy, omega-3s have become a rarity in our diet. Okay, so here's that cascade that we were talking about. See how the pro-inflammatory cascade leads to immune cell cytokines, chronic inflammation, and diseases. And if you have a decrease in serotonin, it can lead to depression. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about sugar and inflammation. So insulin is released by the pancreas after you eat carbohydrates. Eating carbohydrates causes a rise in blood sugar. Insulin assures your cells receive some blood sugar necessary for life and increases glycogen storage. However, it also drives your body to use more carbohydrate and less fat as fuel. And insulin converts almost half of your dietary carbohydrate to fat for storage. If you want to use more fats for energy, the insulin response must be moderated. Diets high in refined sugars release more insulin, thereby allowing less stored fat to be burned. High insulin levels also suppress two important hormones, glucagon and growth hormone. Glucagon promotes the burning of fat and sugar. Growth hormone is used for muscle development and building new muscle mass. That means that a high sugar diet will suppress the burning of fat and the development of muscles. Insulin also causes hunger. As blood sugar increases following a carbohydrate meal, insulin rises with the eventual result of lower blood sugar. This results in hunger often only a couple of hours or less after the meal. Cravings, usually for sweets, are frequently part of this cycle, leading you to resort to snacking, often on more carbohydrates. Not eating makes you feel ravenous, shaky, moody, and ready to quote-unquote crash. If the problem is chronic, you never get rid of that extra stored fat, and your energy is adversely affected. So does this sound like you? The best suggestion for anyone wanting to utilize more fats is to moderate the insulin response by limiting, ideally eliminating, the intake of refined sugars and keeping all other carbohydrate intake to about 40% of the diet. Generally, non-carbohydrate foods, proteins, and fats don't produce much insulin. But here's the kicker. Insulin resistance, or being resistant to the insulin that's produced from the consumption of carbohydrates, causes inflammation. As the cells of your body become loaded with glucose and can store no more, a mechanism will cause the doors to lock, so to speak, so that insulin will not be able to allow more glucose to enter the cell. The result is a problem called insulin resistance and causes higher and higher levels of insulin to be released to quote-unquote clear the glucose out of the bloodstream because the cells are already full. So, the sugar, having no place to go, is processed in the liver and stored as fat. However, when the fat cells begin to signal that they are also full and can store no more fat, the sugar has no place to go with this decreased resistance, so it builds up in the bloodstream and spills over in the urine. We call this condition diabetes. Here's a real important question to ask. How is diabetes usually treated today? What do you think is going to happen to a patient given more and more insulin with less and less receptors available to open the cell doors? In a 2009 study published in the journal Diabetes, researchers found that a protein called F.R.C.S.S serves as a master switch that turns on the expression of a key inflammatory cytokine. When insulin levels are normal, the F.R.C.S.S protein is kept in check. But when a person becomes insulin resistant and pancreatic cells no longer produce enough insulin to overcome the resistance, the activity of this F.R.C.S.S increases, resulting in high inflammatory cytokine release. High levels of inflammation contribute to greater insulin resistance, creating a vicious cycle that you see here. So again, guys, with this diagram, high amounts of sugar cause high levels of insulin to be released. So high levels of sugar here on the right increase the levels of insulin. So the diet, the cells become full. And as they become full of glucose and insulin levels continue to increase, insulin resistance occurs. It's like the cells become deaf to the signal of insulin because they are already full. They can't take any more. So high insulin levels cause cell damage and signal the pro-inflammatory eicosanoids, starting the inflammatory cascade. With a high sugar diet, excess glucose is stored as fat. That's why you've heard a lot in the various different articles and in different books about the glycemic index, because not all carbohydrate foods are created equal. They can behave quite differently in our bodies. The glycemic index, or GI, describes this difference by ranking carbohydrates according to their effect on our blood glucose levels. Choosing low GI carbs leads to healthy insulin levels, or down below the gold line in the graph. Choosing high GI carbs leads to high insulin levels and fluctuating blood glucose levels that result in insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. That's the red line. So high blood sugar equals insulin equals chronic inflammation equals disease. So what's cortisol all about? How is that related to inflammation? Well, stress signals the adrenal glands to release the stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol sends a signal to your body that needs to prepare for a possible flight from danger. The typical thing that you may have heard called the fight or flight syndrome. Sometimes we talked about that in the clinic. This triggers an immediate breakdown of muscle to make more blood glucose. To prevent non-essential organs in the body from using this precious blood glucose, a transient insulin resistance develops with a corresponding rise in insulin levels in the blood. Basically, the body shuts off the use of the blood sugar by anything else but the necessary organs that are needed to fight or flight. Constant stress means constant secretion of cortisol. As your body adapts to chronic stress, you increase insulin. Increased insulin resistance and raises blood sugar levels, therefore creating more visceral fat. This fuels a new round of cortisol secretion, and the end result is you get fatter, especially around the abdominal region, and wind up with a chronic, silent inflammatory process. Again, this diagram is technical, but it's there to show you that there's science behind these areas that are influencing the total inflammatory body burden that you have, and how this increases the potential for chronic illness and disease, and how all of this is preventable with lifestyle changes into an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. So cortisol has directed your cells now to resist insulin and keep sugar circulating. And your body keeps putting out more and more insulin, trying to get the blood sugar levels down. The insulin levels fall below normal, which sends a stress signal to your brain that they have low blood sugar. The result is that more cortisol is released to deal with the stress, increasing the insulin resistance, and a vicious cycle continues. Then, in an attempt to use the insulin in your blood, your body sends the signal it's hungry. And you're not just hungry, you're hungry for carbohydrates, for sugar. If you follow your instincts and eat carbohydrates, your body will secrete more insulin and more cortisol, and the cycle goes on and on. When sugar can no longer enter the cells of the body, it is converted by the liver into fat and is stored. Insulin resistance leads to greater and greater fat storage, but because obesity results in silent chronic inflammation, which also causes even greater insulin resistance, obesity leads to diabetes. Now you can begin to see how excess sugar, chronic stress, and obesity are all connected by insulin resistance. And dare I say, you add this to the sedentary lifestyle of having to sit all day on the way to work, the way home from work, and while at work, you can understand why I've adopted this idea of becoming Dr. Sit, challenging people to realize the connection between how all of these areas lead to this lifestyle reality of chronic illness and disease that's all preventable. Guys, if we value ourselves to the degree that we should, we will take stock of what we need to do to keep ourselves alive and happy, because here's the truth. Your purpose cannot be realized if you are dead and in the ground. I believe personally that everybody was born for a purpose, and that purpose is whatever you choose it to be. It may be helping with your grandchildren, helping your kids with their kids. It might be doing some mission work in another country. It might be speaking your truth or your wisdom into younger generations. Whatever that might be, golfing, whatever your purpose of your life is, it cannot be lived in disability. It cannot be lived with a life that is distracted because it has to focus on dealing with a chronic illness and disease that didn't have to happen in the first place. All right. Here we're talking about fat cells and inflammation now. So both high sugar in the diet and high cortisol levels lead to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance means that there's no place where more glucose can be stored. When that happens, glucose is converted to fat in the liver and stored as fat cells. We're to think of fat cells as just a blob of storage. But we now know, we used to think of it that way, but we now know that fat cells are not just benign inert cells. They are actually very active, producing hormones and metabolic chemicals. When fat cells can no longer store any further fat, it appears that the cells rupture and begin to leak. This leakage attracts white blood cells called macrophages, which begin to increase this inflammatory cytokine process. So you have these fat cells that are metabolically active and create and release many different chemicals. Note that fat cells release different types of chemicals such as interleukins and various different types of, like here, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor. These are all pro-inflammatory markers. Fat cells can work like immune cells, releasing pro-inflammatory proteins known as cytokines in greater and greater amounts as you gain weight. In other words, the fatter you are, the more silent inflammation you generate. Barry Sears, The Anti-Inflammatory Zone. Is that ever a wake-up call to manage your weight? Okay. Hang with me, guys. I know these slides are pretty technical, but I hope you also appreciate how we've been able to get these slides into this presentation that help you see what this is really what's really going on. So allergies and inflammation. Allergies to food, chemicals from the environment that we breathe, eat, and drink or absorb can also cause an allergic response in the body, leading to chronic inflammation. Let's use the example of gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, which is an allergy to a protein in wheat, barley, and rye called gluten. Let's see what happens in this diagram as this gluten molecule reaches a colon, the place where approximately 80% of your immune system lies. So what happens in this diagram is that gluten molecules reach here. They reach the epithelial cells of the colon. The cells sense the intruder and release pro-inflammatory costanoids, and so when those are released, those pro-inflammatory costanoids, they're the flare to attract the immune cells. So now the white blood cells now move towards the area that has the cytokines to bring more white blood cells into the battle. Inflammation occurs, and the inflammation cascade is set up and then begins to cause damage to the actual cells in the lining of the gut. This is called leaky gut syndrome. So in this way, the inflammatory process can spread to any other area of the body. So whether you have an allergy to ragweed pollen or to gluten or any other allergy, the allergic response to these substances can initiate the inflammation process. If the exposure to the allergen continues, the inflammation becomes chronic. So we're going to talk about toxins and inflammation. This is pretty simple. We all can understand what we mean when we refer to toxins. I've listed so many of them here. Things that are not helpful to the body, they're toxic to the body. And some of the easiest ones here: cigarette smoke, drugs, pesticides, aluminum, mercury, drugs, alcohol, household cleaners. These toxins enter the body, and when they enter the body, they cause certain changes. Certain types of oxidative stress increases, free radicals, there's acidification of tissues. Again, the body becomes more acidic with the introduction of toxins, which is why the alkaline water is important. So now we have this pro-inflammatory cascade set up that leads to chronic inflammation and disease. Okay, so now we're going to talk about this thing that I've alluded to different times and talked about in other different presentations about what the acidic pH of our body, what it means to us in a negative way. So the normal human blood pH should be around 7.365 on the scale. Your diet affects your body's pH. Some foods create an acidic environment while others create an alkaline environment. Your body will be healthier with an alkaline environment. Dr. Otto Warburg won the Nobel Prize in 1931 for showing that cancer cells can multiply rapidly in an acidic environment that the cancer cells cannot survive in an alkaline environment. Just like a pool that has the proper pH will not allow for the manifestation of algae or the turning green of the water, cancer cannot survive in an environment that is alkaline. So here in our diagram, we see how the diet can lead to acidity in the body pH, causes damage to the various membranes, leads to free radical damage, cell damage, and then to DNA damage causing cancer and chronic inflammation. What are some acidic sources? Because we can control what actually comes into our body. So dairy, meat, white flour, sugar, soft drinks, tobacco, all of these are issues, are substances that can cause the body to become more acidic. The water we drink, typically even bottled water, has a pH below 6. Even some that say they have this other pH don't. We need to be drinking above 7 to be able to balance the metabolism in our body that even causes a production of acidity within our body. pH and osteoporosis. The body will try to neutralize an acidic environment by using the body's own minerals to buffer the acid and return to a normal pH of 7.365. These minerals are quote-unquote robbed or stolen from your teeth and bones for this purpose. Over time, this leads to demineralization of bone, or a term that we've called osteoporosis. Well, what most women are doing to prevent and treat osteoporosis today. They're taking Fosamax, Actonal, or Bonneville, and they're being told that these drugs prevent bone loss, but it is a big lie. Bone is living tissue and replaces itself every 7 years. Special cells called osteoclasts break down the old bone, and other cells called osteoblasts create new, healthier bone. The way these osteoporosis drugs work is that they block the breakdown of old, weak bone. That way to appear on X-ray that there is more bone left. The fact is there is more bone, but it's just old and weak from the drugs. Here's the irony. The drugs are being sold to prevent osteoporosis and fractures. However, researchers in 2008 reported that these drugs so weaken the bone that hip fractures are occurring in women taking the drugs 5 years or longer from simple low-impact movements, such as walking up a set of stairs. So guys, let's put out the fire, okay? If this chronic inflammation is behind so many of our worst problems today, let's put it out. So what can we do to do that? First thing we need to do is we need to eat more omega-3 foods. Okay, we need to eat foods that are more rich in that part of the diet that helps to turn off the inflammatory process. And we can contact the clinic if you're wanting to have any help on that. We need to be eating more fish, avoid pesticides and toxins. We need to be managing the sugar and insulin protocols. So Dr. Page has his meal plan, protein 3 times a day. We have various different options that are available for that too as well. You need to know your glycemic index for foods. And guys, that Dr. Page Phase 1 and Phase 2 meal plan is available on the website. So make sure that you download that. If you have any questions, you can email me at drdave@mosaiclifecare.com or call us at 905-629-0688. We also strongly recommend foods by the glycemic index. This is just making good, strong, healthy choices. Foods that aren't going to drive the insulin challenges. For instance, white potatoes have a very high glycemic index, but yams and sweet potatoes are much lower. Remember, the key to maintaining a balance in your blood sugar levels and avoiding insulin spikes are not to skip meals. Eat 5 to 6 meals a day instead of 2 or 3 big ones, and make good food choices. The glycemic index is a measure of how food affects your insulin levels. The lower the glycemic index of the food, the better it is for maintaining a balance in blood sugar and insulin. I could give you a detailed list of the foods, but this chart tells you the whole story. With the exception of watermelon, if it's processed carbs, it has a high glycemic index and creates great blood sugar fluctuations and insulin reactions. If it's natural or whole, it has a low glycemic index and leads to healthy blood sugar and insulin levels. When it comes to stress and cortisol, get plenty of rest, exercise, relax, and again, there's some great nutritional products that we can recommend to help to support the stress on the adrenal gland. If you have different types of fat and obesity protocols, we have the Purification Detox Program. This is great. Every January we do this and several times a year. So ask the clinic, contact the clinic for our protocols that we use for the detoxification. You can begin them any time. Allergy protocols, elimination diets. We have something called MRT 150 allergy testing, which is a quick way of doing that. Contact me, we can do that. Metabolic typing is important too as well. And again, there's some foundational nutritional products that we can use to help support you. Metabolic typing is something that we subscribe to and promote. So we need to find your metabolic type. And so if there's any interest in doing this, we can help with that. But according to this metabolic typing theory, your body is genetically best suited for certain spectrums of foods. When you eat the wrong foods, your body produces higher histamine levels. There is increased gut inflammation, destruction of this barrier, this cellular barrier in the gut, decreased absorption of nutrients, and imbalance in intestinal bacteria and more. So we have a metabolic typing test that you can take. We'll send out to you with the handouts to find if you're eating the right foods for your metabolic type. Toxic elimination. Understand where they're coming from, switch to non-toxic products, lose weight. We have a system in the office that can measure your body composition, that can track how your body is managing the toxicity in your body as to whether or not it's a problem. It's a bioimpedance test called the biomarkers assessment. It's very inexpensive, but it helps to provide us with scientific information to know how well you're doing in that area. Again, there's some nutritional and foundational products that are excellent for that. pH balance. You need to know what foods that you may be consuming are either going to be more alkaline or acid. Don't forget to drink alkaline water. That is the water that is produced by a Kangen system. Talk to me if you're interested in trying to figure out how to do that. It's extremely important. We have it in the office too as well if you'd like to take advantage of that. Is it possible to reverse lifestyle diseases? Yes, it is. Thousands of diabetics have graduated from the Pritikin Longevity Center medication-free. Others leave with doses for insulin or drugs markedly reduced. It is possible to do this, guys. It's just a matter of making the proper types of choices. Here's an example of Calvin. Okay, type 2 diabetic. He's an ex-diabetic, ex-obese, S-rheumatoid arthritic, turned senior bodybuilder, made intelligent lifestyle changes, and reversed his health problems. So guys, it's your choice. How you live your life determines your level of chronic inflammation. And your level of chronic inflammation determines how easily or quickly you will manifest one of the major chronic diseases that are there. The silent killer is not a secret anymore. I've exposed it. We've talked about it. We could spend probably a whole week of classes and lectures talking about each one of these different categories and trying to understand the technology behind it. I'm not going to expect you to. Sometimes even I have a hard time because it's so intricate and challenging, and then you add the idea of everyone being their own mosaic. But here's the issue. Making the lifestyle changes, exercise, proper drinking water that's above 7.0, get the Kangen water, decreasing your sugar, getting your exercise, getting moving. All of these things are the simple things, but the manifestation of these simple things is a body that will last you a lifetime. Until next time, this is Dr. David Harper, your wellness coach. It's been a pleasure working with you and talking to you about these ideas, and we'll see you next time.